You ever see someone pretend to eat, just so the world won't see they're starving? The wind cut through the quiet street like broken glass, and Sophia Bennett sat alone on a frozen curb, her thin jacket doing nothing against the 20-degree cold, her fingers trembling as she lifted an empty takeout box to her lips, as if there was still something inside, as if dignity could be faked long enough to survive another hour. People passed by with warm coats and full hands. Some glanced, some smirked. Most didn't care, because to them, she was just another girl who had fallen too far to matter. But what they didn't see was the way she carefully held that box, not like trash, but like it was the last piece of control she had left in a life that had unraveled too fast. Just 2 weeks ago, she had a job, a place to sleep, a reason to wake up before sunrise, cleaning pools in a quiet gated neighborhood where the houses were bigger than anything she had ever imagined, where people didn't look at her unless something needed fixing, and she had accepted that because she didn't need recognition. She just needed stability, something steady, something safe, something that wouldn't disappear overnight. But it did. One mistake, or at least that's what they called it, one accusation she never got to explain, one decision made by someone who never even looked her in the eye. And just like that, she was out. No paycheck, no backup, no warning, just a quiet dismissal that echoed louder than any shout ever could. And now here she was, sitting in the snow, pretending she wasn't hungry, pretending she wasn't scared, pretending she still had some kind of plan, when the truth was she didn't even know where she would sleep that night. A car slowed down across the street, but kept going. A couple walked past, whispering something she chose not to hear, and then a voice broke through the noise, calm, steady, unfamiliar, asking a question no one else had bothered to ask. Why are you pretending? Sophia froze, her hand still midair holding the empty box, and for a second she thought about ignoring him like everyone else. But something in his tone wasn't mocking, it wasn't pity either, it was something else, something that made her feel seen in a way she wasn't ready for. She slowly looked up and saw a man standing a few feet away, dressed simply, nothing flashy, nothing that screamed wealth or status, just a dark coat, clean shoes, and eyes that didn't look away. He stepped a little closer, but not enough to invade her space. And then he said, "If you're hungry, I can get you real food." And just like that, the offer hung in the cold air between them. Simple, direct, the kind of thing anyone else would have accepted without hesitation. But Sophia didn't move. Her grip tightened around the empty box. Her jaw clenched as if saying yes would cost her more than she could afford. Because this wasn't just about food. It was about what accepting it would mean, about admitting that she had nothing left, that she needed help, that she had fallen that far. And for a moment the silence stretched long enough to feel uncomfortable. The man waited, not pushing, not rushing, just watching, and then finally she spoke, her voice quiet but steady. "I don't need food," she said, and the man's brow furrowed slightly, confused, maybe even surprised, because nothing about her situation suggested that was true, but she didn't look away, didn't break, didn't soften. Instead, she lowered the empty box slowly and added, "I need a chance." And something shifted in the air right then, something neither of them fully understood yet, but it was enough to make the man pause, really pause, as if her words had landed somewhere deeper than expected. And as the cold wind kept blowing and the world kept moving around them, he looked at her more closely this time. Not as a stranger on the street, but as someone whose story hadn't been fully told yet. And what he said next would change everything she thought she knew about that night. The man did not answer right away, and that silence felt heavier than the cold pressing against Sophia Bennett's skin as she watched him carefully, waiting for the moment he would either walk away like everyone else or laugh like the others had. But he did neither. Instead, he took a slow breath and asked, "What kind of chance?" And the question caught her off guard because no one had ever followed up before. No one had ever treated her words like they were worth exploring. She hesitated for a second, as if choosing the wrong answer could close the only door left in front of her. Then she said, "A job. Something honest. Something I can prove I am good at." Her voice steadier now, even though her hands were still shaking from the cold. The man glanced down at the empty box still resting in her lap, and then back at her face as if trying to connect two versions of the same person, the one sitting in the snow and the one who believed she still deserved an opportunity. "You had a job before," he said, more like a statement than a question, and she nodded slowly. cleaning pools, maintenance, whatever they needed. I showed up early. I stayed late. I never complained. There was a quiet pride in her tone that had survived everything else falling apart. He tilted his head slightly and asked, "So what happened?" And for a moment her eyes flickered. With something guarded, something painful but controlled, she looked away toward the street where cars kept passing like nothing in her life had changed. "They said I made a mistake," she answered, choosing her words carefully. "Something went missing, and I was the easiest person to blame." She let out a small breath that turned into mist in the freezing air. I tried to explain, but they had already decided. The man's expression did not shift dramatically, but something in his posture changed. Like he was paying closer attention now. "And you are telling me you did not do it," he said, not accusing, just testing. Sophia turned back to him and met his eyes directly. "I am telling you I never even got the chance to prove I did not." And there it was again, that word, chance, hanging between them like it meant more than anything else in the world. The man slipped his hands into his coat pockets and paced a small step to the side, as if thinking. The streetlight above cast a faint glow that revealed the sharp lines of his face, still calm, still unreadable. "If I offered you a job right now," he said slowly, "how would I know you would not bring trouble with you?" It was a fair question, the kind that most people would answer defensively. But Sophia did not rush. She swallowed once and said, "You would not. Not right away. But I would show up. I would do the work, and I would not ask for anything I did not earn." Her answer was simple, but it carried weight, because it was all she had left to offer. Effort, consistency, proof over time. The man studied her for a long second, longer than before, as if measuring something deeper than her words. Then he stepped closer, just enough that she could see his eyes clearly now, steady and focused. "What if I told you," he began, his voice lowering slightly, "that I already know where you used to work?" Sophia's breath caught in her throat, not from the cold this time, but from the sudden shift in the conversation. Her mind raced, trying to figure out how a stranger on the street could possibly know that. And before she could respond, he added, "And what if I told you I was the one who made the decision to let you go?" The world seemed to pause for a split second as those words settled in. The passing cars, the distant voices, even the wind felt quieter. Sophia's fingers tightened around the empty box as her entire body went still, her eyes searching his face for any sign that he was joking. But there was none, only calm certainty. And in that moment, everything she thought she understood about this encounter began to unravel. Because the man standing in front of her was no longer just a stranger offering help. He was the reason she had ended up in the snow in the first place. And now he was waiting for her response. Sophia Bennett stared at him, as if the cold had suddenly disappeared and been replaced by something far more unsettling. Her mind replaying his words again and again, trying to find a way they could mean anything else. But there was no confusion in his voice, no hesitation in his expression. And that made it worse because it meant he was telling the truth. The man standing in front of her was not just someone who knew about her past. He was the one who had decided it did not matter. Her chest tightened, but she refused to look away, refused to shrink back into the version of herself that had silently accepted everything 2 weeks ago. "Then you already made your decision," she said, her voice low but steady, holding onto the last thread of control she had. The man watched her carefully, as if this moment mattered more than anything that had come before. "I made a decision based on what I was told," he replied, his tone still calm. "I did not speak to you directly." Sophia let out a small breath that almost sounded like a laugh, but carried no humor at all. "No, you did not," she said. And for a second there was something sharp in her eyes, not anger, not exactly, but something stronger than disappointment, something rooted in being dismissed without a voice. The man did not interrupt, did not defend himself further. He simply stood there and allowed her to hold that space, which was something no one else had done before. "Do you know what that feels like?" she continued, her words coming a little faster now, but still controlled. "To have someone decide who you are without ever asking you a single question." The wind picked up again, brushing against them, but neither of them moved. "You lost your job," he said, not as an excuse but as a recognition, and she shook her head slightly. "I lost more than that," she answered. "I lost the one thing I thought I had earned, a place where showing up every day actually meant something." Her fingers loosened slightly around the empty box, as if she was finally letting go of the need to pretend. And now you are here offering me a chance, she added, her gaze sharpening again. Why? The question landed heavier than anything else she had said because it forced him to explain something deeper than just the situation. The man took a moment before answering, his eyes not leaving hers. Because you did not take the easy way out, he said, and she frowned slightly, confused. You could have said yes to food, he continued. You could have taken the simplest way to get through the night, but you asked for something harder, something that requires accountability, effort, time. Sophia's expression did not soften, but there was a flicker of something else now, something uncertain. That does not prove anything, she replied, and he nodded once. No, it does not, he agreed. But it shows me where your priorities are, he paused briefly before adding. And that matters more than what someone else claimed about you. The words hung there, shifting the weight of the moment again. Sophia felt the tension in her chest change slightly, not disappear, but move, like something was being challenged inside her. So what now? She asked, her voice quieter but still firm. The man stepped back half a pace as if giving her room to think. Now I offer you something different, he said. Not just a job, not just a second chance, but a test. Sophia's eyes narrowed slightly. A test, she repeated, and he nodded. You come back tomorrow morning, 7 a.m. sharp, same property you used to work at, he said, his tone clear and precise. You work one full day, no special treatment, no introductions, just work. Sophia's heart skipped for a moment, the idea hitting her faster than she expected. And then, she asked, almost before he finished, and then I decide if you were misjudged, he replied, his gaze steady, or if my original decision was correct. The air between them grew heavier again, not with cold, but with the weight of what he was asking, because this was not just an opportunity, it was a chance to face the place that had quietly erased her, to walk back into the same environment that had turned its back on her, and prove something that no one had cared to verify before. Sophia swallowed slowly, her mind racing through every possible outcome, every risk, every reason to say no. And yet none of them felt stronger than the one reason to say yes, because this was the moment she had asked for, the chance she had been holding onto even while sitting in the snow, and now it was right in front of her, offered by the one person she least expected. And the only question left was whether she was willing to take it. Sophia Bennett did not answer right away, and that pause said more than any words could, because the offer in front of her was not simple, it was not safe, and it was not guaranteed to end the way she hoped. She looked past the man for a moment, as if trying to see beyond him, beyond the street, beyond this freezing night, into a version of tomorrow that had not yet been decided. Her fingers slowly released the empty box and let it rest on her lap as she straightened her posture just slightly. Not enough to erase the exhaustion, but enough to show she was still present, still thinking, still choosing. 7 a.m. She repeated quietly, almost to herself, and the man nodded once without breaking eye contact. 7 a.m. He confirmed, his tone steady and unchanged, as if he had already made peace with whatever decision she was about to make. Sophia took a slow breath that filled her lungs with cold air and held it there for a second before letting it go. And if I do everything right, she said, her voice gaining a bit more strength now. If I show up, do the work, keep my head down, prove I am not what they said. She paused just long enough to make sure he was listening. Then what? The man did not hesitate this time. Then you get more than just your job back, he said, and something in the way he said it made her focus sharpen instantly. You get your name cleared, he added, publicly. The word landed with weight because it was not just about income anymore. It was about something deeper, something she had lost without even realizing how much it mattered until now. Her reputation, her sense of identity, the quiet respect she had built through long hours and consistent effort, all of it taken away. In a moment she never had the chance to defend. Sophia's jaw tightened slightly as she processed that. And if I fail? She asked, her voice lower again but still steady. The man met her gaze without flinching. Then nothing changes, he said simply. You walk away, and I walk away, and the decision stands. There was no threat in his tone, no pressure, just a clear outline of reality. And somehow that honesty made the situation feel even more intense. Because there were no hidden conditions. No tricks, just a single path forward that depended entirely on what she chose to do next. The street around them seemed quieter now, as if the world had narrowed down to this one moment. Sophia looked down at her hands for a second, noticing how red they had become from the cold, how small they looked compared to everything she was being asked to carry. And yet she did not feel small, not in the way she had felt earlier when people walked past her like she did not exist. This felt different. This felt like standing at the edge of something that could either rebuild her or confirm every doubt that had been placed on her. She lifted her head again and met his eyes directly. "I will be there," she said. Her voice clear now, no hesitation, no uncertainty, just a decision fully made. The man studied her for a brief moment as if confirming that she meant it. Then he gave a small nod, not dramatic, not overly approving, just enough to acknowledge that the next step had been set. 7 a.m. He repeated once more before turning slightly as if preparing to leave, but then he paused and added, "Do not be late." Not as a warning, but as a simple fact. Sophia almost smiled at that, not because it was funny, but because it was familiar. Rules, expectations, structure, things she understood, things she could work with. "I will not," she replied. And for the first time since he approached her, there was something steady in her tone that had nothing to do with survival and everything to do with intent. The man gave one final glance at her, then turned and walked away into the dim light of the street, leaving her alone again, but not in the same way as before, because now the cold did not feel like the only thing surrounding her. There was something else, something small but real, a direction, a purpose, a reason to get through the next few hours no matter how uncomfortable they were. Sophia slowly stood up from the curb, her legs slightly stiff but steady enough. She looked down at the empty box one last time before setting it aside on the ground, no longer needing it as a shield, as a distraction, as a way to hide. Because tomorrow she would not be pretending anymore. Tomorrow she would walk back into the place that had erased her and face it directly, not as the girl they dismissed, but as someone who had nothing left to lose and everything left to prove. And as the cold wind continued to move through the empty street, Sophia Bennett turned and began to walk, not toward warmth, not yet, but toward something far more important, a chance she had refused to let go of even when everything else had slipped away. Sophia Bennett barely slept that night, and it was not because of the cold, but because her mind refused to slow down. Every hour felt shorter than the last as she replayed the conversation again and again, questioning every word, every look, every possibility of what the next morning might bring. She found a quiet corner near a closed storefront where the wind was not as sharp, and sat there counting the hours instead of minutes, reminding herself that showing up mattered more than anything else now. When the sky finally began to lighten with that faint gray hint of early morning, she stood up before the sun even had a chance to rise, her body stiff, her hands still cold, but her focus clearer than it had been in weeks. She brushed off what she could from her jacket, adjusted her hair with trembling fingers, and started walking toward the one place she had been trying to forget, the gated property where everything had changed. Each step felt heavier as she got closer, not because she was unsure anymore, but because she knew exactly what she was walking back into. Familiar streets turned into reminders of what she had lost. The tall gates came into view just as the clock on a nearby building read 6:47 a.m. Earlier than required, but she did not slow down. If anything, she moved faster, not wanting to risk even a second of doubt creeping in. The security guard at the entrance looked up as she approached, his expression shifting from neutral to slightly confused. "You are not supposed to be here," he said, recognizing her but not welcoming her. Sophia stopped just outside the gate and met his eyes calmly. "I am here to work," she replied, her voice steady despite everything. The guard hesitated for a moment, clearly unsure, then glanced at a small list in his hand before looking back at her. "Name?" he asked, and for a split second Sophia felt that familiar tension return, the same feeling of being questioned without context. But this time she did not hesitate. "Sophia Bennett," she said clearly. The guard scanned the list again, and his brow furrowed slightly before he stepped aside just enough to open the gate. "You are on the list," he admitted, almost surprised, and that single sentence shifted something inside her, because it meant this was real. This was not just a conversation in the cold. This was a door opening again. Sophia nodded once and walked through without looking back. The path toward the main house felt longer than she remembered. The large windows, the clean stone walkways, the stillness of the early morning all felt the same, and yet completely different now. She reached the pool area just as the clock hit 6:59 a.m. and stopped for a brief second, taking in the sight of the water, still and untouched, exactly how she used to find it every morning. And then, without waiting for anyone to tell her what to do, she moved, grabbing the cleaning equipment from the same storage area, her hands remembering the routine even if her mind was racing. She started with the surface, skimming leaves that had settled overnight, then moved to checking the filters, her movements precise, efficient, familiar, each action grounding her a little more, reminding her that this was something she knew how to do, something no accusation could take away. Minutes passed, and then footsteps approached behind her. She did not turn immediately, not wanting to break her focus, but she felt the presence, the weight of being watched, and when she finally looked up, she saw him standing there again. The same man from the night before, no longer just a stranger in a simple coat, but clearly someone who belonged here, someone who did not need to explain himself in this space. His eyes moved from her to the pool and back again, observing, measuring, not interrupting. Sophia held his gaze for a brief moment before returning to her work, because she understood now that this was not about convincing him with words. It was about showing him through action. The sun began to rise slowly, casting light across the water, and as the first full hour of the day unfolded, Sophia Bennett did exactly what she said she would do. She showed up, she worked, and she gave him nothing but the truth of who she was, one task at a time, one moment at a time, knowing that every second counted towards something far greater than just getting through the day. The morning moved forward slowly, but with purpose as Sophia Bennett continued working without pause, each motion deliberate, each task completed with the same quiet discipline she had always relied on. The sound of the skimmer cutting through the water, the soft hum of the filtration system, the faint crunch of gravel under distant footsteps all blended into a rhythm that felt almost familiar, almost like she had never left, but she knew better, because now every second carried weight. Every detail mattered in a way it never had before. She checked the chemical levels with precision, adjusting them carefully, making sure the balance was exact, not rushed, not careless, because this was not just routine anymore. This was proof, and somewhere behind her she could still feel his presence, not constant, not intrusive, but there, observing, waiting, measuring more than just her work. After about an hour, another worker approached, someone she recognized from before, a man named Carl who used to handle landscaping. He slowed down when he saw her, confusion written clearly across his face. "I thought you were gone," he said, not unkindly but not warmly either. Sophia did not stop what she was doing as she answered, "I am just here for the day," her tone neutral, focused. Carl nodded slowly as if that explained something, though it clearly did not answer all his questions. "Well, the manager is going to notice," he added, glancing toward the main house. Sophia gave a small nod. "I expect that," she replied, and that was the end of it. No defense, no explanation, just acceptance of whatever was coming. Carl lingered for a moment before walking away, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than before. Because now it was not just about being watched by one person, it was about being seen again by a place that had already decided who she was. Time passed, and the sun rose higher, warming the surface of the pool just enough to soften the edge of the cold air. Sophia moved from the pool to the surrounding deck, scrubbing the tiles, clearing debris, fixing small details that most people would never notice but that she knew made a difference. Her hands moved faster now, more confident, as muscle memory took over, but her mind stayed sharp, aware of every sound, every movement around her. Then footsteps approached again, firmer this time, more direct, and she knew without turning that this was different. She stood up slowly and faced the direction of the sound as a woman in a tailored coat stepped into view, her expression tight, controlled, the kind of authority that did not need to be announced. "What are you doing here?" the woman asked, her voice calm but unmistakably firm. Sophia met her gaze without hesitation. "Working," she replied, just as steady. The woman's eyes narrowed slightly. "You were terminated," she said, emphasizing the finality of that word. Sophia nodded once. I am aware, she answered, and for a moment the tension between them stretched, the past and present colliding in a single glance. Then you should not be on this property. The woman continued, taking a step closer, and Sophia felt the weight of that statement, the same authority that had removed her before now standing right in front of her again. But she did not step back. She did not lower her eyes. Instead, she said, I was told to come in today. Her voice calm but firm enough to hold its ground. The woman paused, clearly not expecting that response. By who? She asked, and before Sophia could answer, another voice cut through the moment. Calm, steady, unmistakable. By me. The man stepped forward from behind, closing the distance with quiet confidence. The woman turned toward him immediately, her posture shifting just slightly as recognition settled in. Mr. Reed, she said, her tone changing just enough to reveal respect. And in that moment, everything aligned. The name, the authority, the presence. Sophia finally understood the full weight of who had been standing in front of her the night before. Alexander Reed. Not just someone connected to the decision, but the one who carried it. The one whose word defined what happened here. He glanced briefly at Sophia before returning his attention to the woman. She is here for the day, he said simply. No explanation, no justification, just a statement that did not invite argument. The woman hesitated for a fraction of a second, clearly recalibrating. Understood, she replied, though her eyes flicked back to Sophia with a mix of curiosity and something else that was harder to define, perhaps doubt, perhaps recognition, perhaps both. Alexander remained still for a moment longer before looking at Sophia again, his gaze steady, unreadable. Continue, he said, and that single word carried everything she needed to hear. Not approval, not praise, just permission to keep proving what she already knew. Sophia gave a small nod and turned back to her work, her movements just as precise as before. But now something had shifted, because this was no longer just a test in silence. This was a challenge unfolding in full view, and every action she took from this moment on would be seen, questioned, and remembered. The tension in the air did not disappear after that moment. It simply changed shape as Sophia Bennett returned to her work with even sharper focus, aware now that every movement carried more weight than before, not just because Alexander Reed was watching, but because others had begun to notice. The quiet glances from staff members passing by, the subtle pauses in conversations, the unspoken questions hanging in the background, all of it built a pressure that could easily shake someone who was unsure of themselves. But Sophia did not rush, and she did not react. She leaned into the routine instead, grounding herself in the details she could control. She finished cleaning the pool edges and moved on to checking the equipment room, inspecting valves, tightening connections, wiping down surfaces that had been overlooked, her pace steady, her attention consistent, as if the outside noise did not exist. Around mid-morning, the same woman returned, this time standing at a distance with a tablet in her hand, observing more closely, not interrupting but clearly evaluating. Sophia could feel it, but chose not to acknowledge it directly, because this was no longer about convincing anyone with explanations. It was about letting the work speak without distraction. After another hour, the sun had fully risen and the temperature had climbed just enough to make the air feel less harsh. But the weight of the situation remained. A delivery truck arrived at the front of the property, and two workers began unloading supplies near the side entrance. Sophia noticed one of the containers had been placed too close to a drainage path, something that could cause a problem later. Without hesitation, she walked over and adjusted it slightly, then informed one of the workers in a calm tone. This area needs to stay clear or water will back up when the system runs. The worker looked surprised for a moment, but nodded, moving the container further away. It was a small action, something most people would overlook, but it showed awareness, initiative, and understanding of the environment beyond just assigned tasks. From across the courtyard, Alexander watched this interaction carefully, his expression unchanged but his attention clearly focused. Sophia returned to her work without waiting for acknowledgement, continuing through the checklist she had built in her mind. Late morning approached, and the manager stepped closer again, this time with a different tone, less confrontational, more analytical. You remember procedures well, she said. Not quite a compliment, but not a criticism either. Sophia paused briefly and replied, I was trained to do the job right. then continued without adding anything more. The manager studied her for a moment as if reconsidering something previously assumed, then asked, "If you were given the chance to stay, would you handle things differently?" The question was direct and carried more meaning than the words alone. Sophia straightened slightly and met her gaze. "I would handle things the same way I always have," she answered, her voice calm but firm, with consistency. There was no defensiveness in her tone, only clarity. The manager did not respond immediately. Instead, she nodded slightly and stepped back again, leaving Sophia to continue. As the day moved into early afternoon, the workload shifted to smaller maintenance details. Sophia checked lighting fixtures, adjusted timers, ensured that everything aligned with operational standards. Each task completed without hesitation, without error, and without seeking recognition, because she understood that the true test was not in a single impressive moment, but in sustained reliability. Across the property, the subtle shift in perception had already begun. The same people who had dismissed her before were now watching with a different lens, not fully convinced but no longer certain of their original judgment. And at the center of it all, Alexander remained, observing quietly, allowing the process to unfold without interference, because what he was measuring could not be rushed or influenced. It had to be revealed through action over time. And as the hours passed and the work continued, Sophia Bennett did not try to change the narrative with words. She let it rewrite itself through every decision she made, every detail she handled, and every moment she chose to stay focused instead of reacting, knowing that the outcome of this day would not be decided by what was said, but by what could no longer be denied. By early afternoon, the rhythm of the day had shifted again as Sophia Bennett moved into the final stretch of work. The sun now high enough to cast sharp reflections across the water, the property fully awake with activity. Yet something beneath the surface had changed in a way that could not be ignored. The quiet doubt that once followed her had begun to fracture, replaced by a cautious attention that grew with every hour she continued without mistake. She finished adjusting the pool system timers and stepped back briefly to review the entire area, scanning for anything out of place, anything incomplete, her eyes moving with precision across details most would never notice. A faint irregularity near the filtration panel caught her attention. She approached without hesitation and opened the casing, immediately spotting a loose connection that had likely been overlooked during recent maintenance. She tightened it carefully, double-checking the alignment before closing the panel. Again, it was a small correction, but one that could have caused a system failure if ignored, and she knew that, which was why she did not leave it for someone else. Across the courtyard, the manager noticed this as well, her expression shifting slightly, no longer guarded in the same way, instead more thoughtful, as if recalculating a conclusion she had once believed was certain. Sophia wiped her hands and moved on without pause, not waiting for acknowledgement, not seeking validation, because she understood that consistency was the only thing that would hold under scrutiny. A few minutes later, the manager approached again, this time with a slower pace, less authority in her stance and more intention in her observation. "There was an incident 2 weeks ago," she said, her voice measured, not confrontational but direct. Sophia turned to face her fully, her posture steady. "Yes," she replied, not avoiding it, not deflecting. The manager studied her for a moment before continuing. "An item was reported missing from the storage inventory." The words carried the weight of the original accusation. The reason everything had changed. Sophia did not look away. "I remember," she said calmly. The manager took a breath as if choosing her next words carefully. "Today you have had full access to the same areas," she said, her eyes fixed on Sophia, "and nothing has gone missing." The statement hung in the air, not quite an apology, not quite a resolution, but something in between. Sophia let a brief silence pass before responding. "I did not take anything then," she said, her voice steady but softer now, not defensive, just clear. The manager nodded slowly, as if acknowledging a truth that had been overlooked, then glanced toward Alexander Reed, who stood at a distance, still observing, still silent, his presence unchanged but his focus unwavering. The manager turned back to Sophia and said, "There was a discrepancy in the records," her tone shifting again. "It appears the item was logged incorrectly and later found in a different section." She paused, allowing the meaning to settle. You were not responsible. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of everything that had been taken from her. Sophia felt the moment land fully, not as relief, not as triumph, but as something quieter, something deeper, a restoration of truth that had never been given space before. She did not react dramatically, did not raise her voice or demand acknowledgement. Instead, she simply nodded once, accepting the statement for what it was. The manager watched her closely, perhaps expecting more, but when none came, she added, "I will correct the record." And with that, she stepped back, leaving the space open again. Sophia stood still for a brief second, letting the silence settle around her. The sounds of the property continuing as normal, yet nothing felt the same, because the question that had followed her into this day had finally been answered, not through argument, not through defense, but through presence and consistency. Across the courtyard, Alexander shifted slightly and began to walk toward her. His steps measured, his expression still controlled but carrying something different now, something resolved. Sophia turned to face him as he approached, the distance between them closing slowly, the weight of the entire day resting in that moment. And as he stopped just a few feet away, the air seemed to hold still again, waiting for what he would say next, because whatever came now would not just define the outcome of this test. It would define everything that followed. Alexander Reed stopped in front of Sophia Bennett, and for a moment neither of them spoke. As the weight of the entire day settled between them, the quiet hum of the property continuing in the background as if nothing significant had just shifted, but they both knew better, because this was no longer about a simple test. This was about truth finally, standing where doubt used to be. Sophia held his gaze, not with defiance, not with expectation, but with a calm steadiness that had been built through every hour. She chose to show up instead of walk away. Alexander studied her for a brief moment longer before speaking. "You did exactly what you said you would do." His voice even, controlled, but carrying a clarity that had not been there before. Sophia did not respond immediately, allowing his words to land without interruption. "You showed up early. You worked without being told, and you handled things that were not assigned to you." He continued, his eyes moving briefly across the pool area, as if reviewing the evidence of her work, then returning to her. "That matters." Sophia nodded once, not as acknowledgement of praise, but as recognition of fact, because she had not come here to impress. She had come to prove. Alexander took a slow breath before continuing. "The report has been corrected," he said, referring to the earlier accusation. "You were not responsible." The confirmation echoed what the manager had already stated, but coming from him it carried finality, the kind that could not be reversed or questioned. Sophia felt the words settle fully this time, not just heard but accepted in a way that restored something she had lost, not loudly, not dramatically, but in a quiet, grounded way that made her stand a little straighter. "Thank you," she said simply, her voice calm, because there was nothing else to add. No need to revisit what had already been resolved. Alexander watched her for a moment as if expecting more, but when none came he nodded slightly. "You can return to your position here," he said, his tone shifting just enough to signal a decision had been made. "Full-time, effective immediately." Sophia absorbed the offer, the words she had been working toward since the moment she sat in the snow, and yet she did not react the way most would expect. She did not rush to accept. She did not smile in relief. Instead, she asked, under the same conditions, her question quiet but precise. Alexander's expression sharpened slightly. "What do you mean?" he asked, and she held his gaze as she answered. "No assumptions, no decisions without hearing both sides." Her voice steady, not demanding, just clear. "If I work here, I want the same chance to be heard that I did not have before." The request hung in the air, simple but significant, because it was not just about the job. It was about the standard that would define everything moving forward. Alexander did not answer immediately. He considered her words carefully, then gave a small nod. "That is fair," he said, and something in that agreement shifted the dynamic between them. No longer employer and dismissed worker, but something closer to mutual understanding. Sophia let a brief breath pass, the tension she had carried finally easing, not disappearing but settling into something manageable. "Then I accept," she said, her voice calm, grounded, certain. Alexander nodded once more. Report tomorrow at 7 a.m., he added, echoing the same structure that had started this entire process. Sophia almost smiled at the familiarity of it. I will be here, she replied. And this time there was no uncertainty at all. Alexander turned slightly as if preparing to leave, but paused for a moment, glancing back at the pool, then at her. One more thing, he said. Sophia waited. You asked for a chance, he continued. Most people would have asked for something easier. Sophia held his gaze and answered without hesitation. Easy does not fix what matters. Alexander studied her for a second longer, then gave a small, almost imperceptible nod before walking away, leaving her standing there not as someone who had been given something, but as someone who had earned it. The sun beginning to lower slightly in the sky as the day moved toward its end. Sophia looked around the property one more time. The same place that had once closed its doors to her now open again, not because it had changed, but because she had refused to let the wrong version of her story be the final one. And as she picked up her tools and prepared to finish the last details of the day, there was only one thought that stayed with her. This was not where her story ended. It was where it finally began to move forward again.